Welcome back, everyone. It's always a pleasure to have Kent Weare at the Integrate conference. This time, it's extra special as he recently moved to the Logic Apps team as a principal product manager after leading the Power Automate team for 2 successful years. As most of you know, he's also an active contributor on YouTube, nurturing the community on cloud-based automation and Azure Integration Services. Other than work and communities activities, Kent enjoys running, skiing, and watching football. I would like to know what team he supports. Also, when asked Kent what superpower he would like to have, he gave us an interesting answer. Any guesses? It's his answer, right? To control the weather. We wish he could do that one day as well. Okay, now, get ready to learn everything about application and SaaS integration from a veteran himself. Music.
Hello, everyone. Kind of feel like I was in the WWE there. I was kind of looking for a little bit more aggressive music, but that was great. Thank you, Gauri. And thank you, Kovai, for hosting this event. I know there's been a lot of challenges with COVID, and it's been awesome to come over here. I've been here several times. I always look forward to making the trip to London in the spring. So it's awesome to see you all. Many familiar faces here this morning, so great to be here. For today's session, I'm going to focus on application and SaaS integration. And what we're going to see is there's a kind of a continuation of my talk next with Weare. So you're going to see a lot of intersection of our topics. And I'm approaching it more from like a pro developer perspective. And Weare is going to take advantage of a citizen developer persona and be able to leverage a lot of the assets that I build through this session itself. So in terms of agenda, I do want to start with just some current application modernization trends. I think it's pretty important to understand the landscape and what's going on out there in the world. Then we'll get more into Azure Integration Services and how we can take advantage of application and SaaS integration to address those needs. And then demos. So I know you folks generally like to see a lot of demos, so we're going to focus a lot of that in this session as well. So one thing I would encourage you to do over the course of the next 3 days is really think forward, not behind. Don't think about what you have today in terms of your organization and maybe some of the challenges there. Think more about forward-looking themes. One of the benefits that we do have working at Microsoft is working with customers worldwide. And I've had the opportunity to participate in a lot of executive briefing sessions. And it's one of those things that you see a common trend amongst a lot of these CIOs is they're very competitive, and the speed is today's currency. So the faster you can go ahead and build new applications, new services, the better off you are from taking advantage of those business opportunities as well. And I think one of the key themes of my talk today is just really around agility. And being agile gives you that opportunity to capture those opportunities. Living in monolithic worlds isn't going to give you the agility that you need from that perspective. So I just want to spend a few minutes just talking about some industry trends. The data comes from Turbonomic State of Multi-Cloud. And there's a link there. You'll be able to get the deck later if you're interested in taking a look at the data itself. So if we think about application modernization, and how you can think of reading this slide is we've got 3 different sections. The top being leaders, the middle being the majority, and then lastly being laggard. And when customers were asked to talk about application modernization and how they approach it, this is how they answered. So number 1 was really around lifting and shifting continues to be the most popular method for modernizing applications. So this is your typical model of you have VMs on-prem, you upload it to the cloud, you operate it, and you're able to deliver on some operational benefits. So generally, maybe you're not dealing with storage and SANs and some of the networking. There's opportunities there. Now, close second, and this will make more sense if you have the slides because you'll be able to read it better, but we've got organizations making some changes to take advantage of cloud computing capabilities itself. So you might be rewiring parts of your application to take advantage of consumption-based services, for example. And that was a close second. Next up is the re-architecture of applications to benefit cloud native itself. And I think this is generally when people try to migrate their applications, it's like, do we want to reimagine this? And that's where you start to see that reimagining happening from that perspective. And then lastly, and this is pretty important, and this kind of follows up on Balin's slides itself, is that containers are becoming a way to build those new applications. And so this is something that continues to be a trend within the industry, and you're going to see why, especially if we think about this in the context of multi-cloud itself. Now, historically, I've been a little bit of a doubter, especially before I joined Microsoft, around multi-cloud. And it is actually a thing, but it's a thing for different reasons. So when we think about leaders, they think about multi-cloud from a differentiation perspective. So using those best-of-breed services in order to come up with the best outcome itself. Now, the laggards are more interested on availability. It's about mitigating risk. So, if this cloud goes down, I want to be able to spin something up in another cloud and magically be able to do that effectively. And so why that isn't as important from the leader's perspective is they've actually been able to architect it properly in the first place, and then are more interested in how do you go ahead and build the best solution using the best tools, the best APIs, the best AI and ML capabilities or big data capabilities itself. Now, in terms of barriers to entry, application portability is very high on this list in the upper left-hand corner. And really, it's that ability, if I need to move my application, how can I go ahead and do it? And what are the constraints that are going to prevent me from doing so? Similarly, security. Naturally, securing one cloud is hard enough. How do you go ahead and do that across multiple clouds from that perspective? Costs is another area of concern, for no surprise. If you have services spun up in another cloud that are idling, but there's still some sort of charge for it, is that a good use of corporate capital? And then lastly, similar to the application portability, data portability. How do you actually go ahead and move data from one cloud to another? Obviously, people don't like data silos, but now naturally when you start to have multi-clouds, you start to introduce those islands, and how do you bring all of that data together? And then the last area I wanted to talk briefly about was just how people think about low maintenance versus vendor lock-in. Oftentimes organizations are seeing multi-cloud as a way to mitigate vendor lock-in. It could be from a commercial perspective in terms of bringing multiple parties together and say, give me the best deal. But it could also be just around, do I want the best possible service? And what we're starting to see is a trend shifting to low maintenance being more important than concerns around vendor lock-in as well. So as an integration specialist, what does this mean to me? Why should I care about this? So I think some of the key takeaways here is that change is everywhere, and as a result, being agile is key. And so one of the strategies you can use to mitigate some of those challenges is using Azure API management. So if you're not familiar with Azure API management, now would be a good time to learn. And you can kind of think about it from this perspective. If you have these different APIs that live in different clouds, how can you bring together a common design surface and also a common management surface so that you're not looking at this from across many different planes? Next up, Logic App Standard is the most portable runtime that we do have. Balin talked a little bit about Arc-enabled Logic Apps and the ability to take your standard application and run it on-prem, run it preferably in our cloud, or if necessary, run it on someone else's cloud itself. And so this is really that opportunity of building your interfaces once and then being able to run them where it makes most sense for you. Back to the data portability challenge, messaging is a powerful tool that you can take advantage of when federating these multi-cloud architectures. If you want to bring that data together from those multi-clouds, messaging and streaming gives you that opportunity to bring that into a common location. And lastly, but certainly not least, integration continues to be an interesting and exciting space, and probably arguably quite complex as well. But the reality is this creates good opportunities for people in this room as you look for the right business outcome itself. So just shifting gears now more into the core of the session. So we're going to talk about Azure Integration Services, application and SaaS integration itself. So this is a slide that we've all sort of seen before and just sort of is the building blocks of AIS. So whether it's exposing an API gateway, having workflows and orchestration through Logic Apps or Azure Functions, and then naturally events and messaging as we connect all of these various systems together. Now, naturally, you can't have a talk about application and SaaS integration without talking about connectors. So I thought it would be worth spending a few minutes to talk about our different types of connectors, especially as we start to think about Logic App Standard. And so we have two models when it comes to connectors. Number one is built in, and this is for Logic App Standard. And then we also have what's called managed or Azure connectors. And so if we think about what is the difference between these two types of connectors. So built-in is available in standard. This offers you single tenancy, so it's basically your instance of the connector. In general, you'll have better performance because it is running within your compute. And as a result, it gives you the opportunity to run it within better proximity to some of your other resources. So for example, you can connect to a VNet within your subscription and be able to have less latency from that perspective. So it does pair well with VNets. And then also, this is probably a lesser known thing, but you can build custom connectors in standard. And it's through what we call the service provider interface implementation. And I do have a link that's in the call to action at the end of the deck where you can dig into that further. So if you want to be able to build a connector that we don't have in our library today, but you want to be able to run it inside of your compute, you have that opportunity to do so. Now, the other type of connector is probably something you're more familiar with. Like this is the connectors that we've been using in our consumption plan. These are the connectors that are shared with the Power Platform as well. And these are deployed, hosted, and managed by Microsoft. And as a result, we have to manage them in a very safe manner so that we don't interrupt other customers, noisy neighbor type situations. So as a result, we do have rate limiting that's strictly enforced. That will generally depend upon the service itself, but it could mean having 600 transactions per minute or connections per minute. And if you start to exceed that, we'll start to send 429 retries back to you to go ahead and try again because we have to protect the platform itself. Now, if you want to access on-premises data sources, you have the ability to do so with some of those connectors through the on-premises data gateway. And that will allow you to traverse the public cloud to your local data center to talk to your SQL or SAP systems, etc. Now, we charge for these based upon specific meters, and it's all about consumption. So there is a charge per action, and it's generally quite small, but naturally as you use more, you end up paying more versus the built-in model where that's part of your overall hosting plan cost itself. Now, we do have custom connectors that are available with our managed connectors. These are going to be Swagger-enabled endpoints. These are generally codeless, where there's an existing API, and you basically build a facade on top of it, a contract using Swagger that allows you then to easily plug into that service through the Logic Apps designer. And so that is a very popular way of introducing a custom connector. You can also share those custom connectors through a couple different programs. We do have a verified certification process. This is more if you're an ISV and you wanted to make your service available, you would have the ability to go through that channel. And then we also have something that's more community driven, which is the independent publisher program, where there are specific guidelines and things you have to adhere to. But if you wanted to build a specific connector, we'll let you publish it. We'll go through a certification process, and then it would be available to anyone who would want to use it. We clearly mark it as an independent publisher, so it sets expectations around who would own the sustainability of that specific connector. Now, in terms of the demos that we're going to see here across my session and Wagner's session, we've got service bus, request response, HTTP, compose and variables, invoke a workflow, SQL Server, inline code. Those would all be examples of built-in connectors. And so those are things that are going to run inside of my compute. Then we've got a couple other examples around ServiceNow and Microsoft Dataverse. Those would be examples of Azure connectors. So when you're in Logic App Standard, you see two tabs. That's really what this means, built-in, and then you've got managed or Azure itself. In this afternoon session, we'll talk more about roadmap in terms of what other connectors are coming to built-in. This is something that's really important to us, certainly as we start to talk about enterprise scenarios and bringing more of those connectors that lend themselves to enterprise integration and allowing you to run them inside of your compute. So stay tuned for that this afternoon. The other thing I wanted to chat a little bit about is the demo architecture itself. When we do have these built-in connectors, we also can take advantage of other features such as VNet connectivity. So one of the scenarios we talk about in the demo itself right now, this morning, is that we've got Azure SQL exposed through a private endpoint. And that private endpoint will be in a VNet that our Logic App Standard instance is connected to. And so what we can do then is have truly private traffic going to that SQL server, and that gives you more of that enterprise feel of being able to run these things in a bubble per se without needing that public access to some of those endpoints. And so this is another core capability of Standard and is something that is reasonably easy to go ahead and set up. And we'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon as well in terms of those details, but I wanted to call that out. So here's the demo landscape. It's going to, across both of these sessions, as I mentioned. And the scenario itself is we're a manufacturer, Contoso Manufacturing, and we naturally have products that we sell, and we need to be able to handle the shipping of those products. And so naturally we need to integrate with other trading partners in order to fulfill that. And we'll have this opportunity to then build on top of the integration through the use of the Power Platform. And Wagner will get more into those details. But what I'm going to focus on in my session is more of this back end side of things. So if you see the box with the Azure Integration Services, that's really where I'm going to be focused on here. And then this afternoon, Wagner will build on top of it. So the first scenario we're going to talk about is order entry and discount calculations. And from this specific scenario, we've got a Power App that's going to access an API that's been exposed as a custom connector to the Power App itself. And this API management API is going to protect or expose our Azure Logic App that will then go ahead and connect to a backend SQL server. Now, this is going to be stateless execution, so another benefit of Logic App Standard is that we can actually do this in a very low latency manner. And I think in the past, there's always been some concerns about, is request response right for Logic Apps, or request response right for BizTalk when you've got a client application waiting for a response. And stateless really gives us that opportunity to address those specific use cases itself. Now, for the purposes of demo, I've enabled debugging so that we can actually see these things are real and it's not just a bunch of smoke and mirrors, but that's generally not something you would enable for production from that perspective. So what I'm going to do is just switch over to the Azure portal, and we'll take a look at this specific workflow. Yeah, thank you. So what we've got here is a Logic App, and we're going to expose an HTTP trigger. This will be a post, so we're going to accept a message body in. And what we're going to do is be able to provide the discount for a specific discount code that's been provided from the Power App itself. All right, there we go. So as part of this request, what we have is a try scope, and you'll see why that's important a little bit later. So we're going to go ahead and execute a query, based upon the payload that comes in. So we're going to provide a discount code as part of that API call. We'll then go ahead and look up that discount code. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to check to see if that discount code is active. And so if it's active, great, that's our happy path. We're then going to go ahead and use our inline code capabilities to go ahead and calculate the discount. So every discount code will have a corresponding percentage off. And so we'll get that percentage and then provide some simple math to generate the value of the discount. Then we'll go ahead and then generate what is the total amount itself. We'll compose basically a response based upon those outputs and some of the information that was passed in. And then we'll go ahead and provide a response back to the client itself. So we can go into Postman here, and here's my post message, my request. I can go ahead and click this button, say that we've got a discount code of Integrate 2022. We've got an order total of $100.50, and we've got a specific order number itself. And then what happens is when we go ahead and get the response, we're going to see the overall value of the total amount based upon that discount code. Now, that's great. That's kind of our happy path. But let's just take a look at what happens when we don't have an active discount code. So in that specific scenario, we want to return a 400. So we'll just craft up a message with the discount code indicating that it has expired. We'll go ahead, we'll send that back, but we don't want the process to end there. We want to know if people are abusing these discount codes. You know, you've all been there. There's like the little add-ins for Chrome that says use this discount code, right? So we want to be able to track those codes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually put a message on Service Bus. And we're going to actually send this over to a specific topic where we will then be able to process those requests and perform some downstream processing. So what we're going to do in the essence of a SaaS integration demo is we'll go ahead and connect with ServiceNow, and we'll log the fact that this discount code was tried, people tried to use it. Same thing if a discount code is not found. If someone's just randomly, they've got an RPA bot and they're trying to guess our codes, we'll go ahead and track those as well. And once again, we're going to do this in a very decoupled manner. So we're going to compose a message, we're going to throw it at Service Bus, and then what we'll be able to do is create topic subscriptions from another logic app that's interested in processing that message. And so that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to have a peak lock scenario where we'll go ahead and connect to that topic. We'll parse the JSON that's coming off of the topic itself, and then we need to perform some integration with ServiceNow. Now, ServiceNow isn't sort of a one-call fire and forget. We need to do some lookups. We need to gather some reference data. So we want to know what is the system ID for the application development group that's going to be responsible for fixing that specific issue. We also need to be able to log this request underneath a specific account. And then what we'll go ahead and do is create the record. So we have to make a couple calls to aggregate this data, then we can go ahead and create the record. Because we are using peak lock, we can go ahead and complete that message. So for some reason, if we have an issue with the ServiceNow calls and we get a failure, what's going to end up happening is we've got our exception handler that's going to go ahead and abandon that message. And so this gives us, even though we're running in a stateless manner, some durability about messages and knowing that when we actually complete the message that everything's been good from that perspective. So what we can now do is we'll do the invalid code first. So we'll provide a discount code of Integrate 2021, and we're going to get a response back saying that discount code has expired. Then what we'll do is send just a fake discount code itself. We'll go ahead and send that, and then we'll say the discount code could not be found. So if we head back over to our Logic App instance here and we hit Overview, we'll be able to go ahead and see that these two requests had just recently fired itself. So there we go, 10:44, 10:45 a.m. And if we head over to our ServiceNow instance and hit refresh, we'll see that we've logged a couple tickets. So here we've got the integrate blah, blah, blah wasn't found, and then we have the integrate 2021 has expired. And so this is an opportunity to use SaaS integration quite easily using a connector and wiring that up very quickly from that perspective. So that's scenario number one. Now, scenario two is where we want to have our shipper come pick up our product. So we've received the order and we're ready now to have someone come pick it up and actually deliver it to the customer itself. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to have Logic Apps have a subscription on Dataverse. So Microsoft Dataverse, it's essentially the data platform that underpins both the Power Platform and Dynamics 365. And when we have this new order created, we're going to actually go ahead and subscribe to that event and pick up that event itself. Now, what we've decided to do here is we've decided to federate with this delivery partner. And we're going to go ahead and use messaging as a way to transfer that order to them. And so we'll pick this up from a Logic App perspective out of Dataverse. Then we'll go ahead and publish this onto the Weare, and then gives our trading partner the ability to go ahead and to consume this. So this is very much a decoupled, loosely coupled way of approaching this specific scenario. Now, Wagner's going to show the actual Power App this afternoon. So I'm going to do what any integration developer would do, and I will just automate creating a record inside of Dataverse. So I just have a very simple Logic App. It's going to run, and it's just going to create some sample data for us in the orders table. We can see that that's now succeeded. And then what we've got is a facade in terms of dealing with these events. So what we've got here is a Logic App that's going to subscribe when we've got a row that's added. There's another Logic App that will subscribe when a row has been modified. And what we want to do is share this processing. So when either one of these events happen, we'll go ahead and call another Logic App, a common Logic App or a child Logic App, to do that processing. And so that's what's happening here. We've got a Logic App that's exposing an HTTP request internally. Then what we're going to do is we want to look up the customer data based upon the information that's passed as part of the order, so that when we go ahead and generate this message for our supplier, that we've got both customer data and order data. So we're going to do some enrichment from that perspective, and then we'll go ahead and publish this message to our shipping order topic. Here we're using parameters, Logic App standard parameters, so that we can not mess up our topic connection strings essentially. And so if we go ahead and look at this, we should have seen that this is run and it's available for pickup from our supplier itself. So that just ran at 10:47 itself. So that's scenario number two. So scenario number three is, you can imagine you've ordered something from Contoso. You don't care who's shipping it. That's not your problem. You just want to know where is your goods, where are your goods. And so what we've done is gone ahead and built a chatbot. And you'll see that GUI this afternoon, that user experience around it. But what I've had to do as part of my responsibilities is go ahead and expose that capability to the chatbot itself. Now in this case, we've got a delivery service providing an API that me as a user of that service can go ahead and expose through API management, and once again make that callable inside of the enterprise itself. Now this one is a little bit unique in the sense that we're using something called Bot Framework Composer, which is typically more of a pro dev experience versus Power Automate, which is more of that citizen dev experience, and there's some native integration inside of the Power Platform for that. And Wagner will explain in his talk why we did it that way, but there's some other capabilities around adaptive cards that we can take advantage of. So here what we're going to do is expose this API that allows other parts of the organization to go ahead and use it, because a chatbot might not be the only place where we want to go ahead and call it itself. So here what we're going to do is just take a look at API management. And we've got a fairly simple shipping API that is here. And we will go ahead and expose this API and really just front some backend systems itself. So if we go ahead and take a look at the policies, I might have to zoom in a bit. We've got some backend policies where we're going to go ahead and have the base URL and then go ahead and provide some URI rewrites. And here you're going to see essentially tokens of these specific values. Now, what do those tokens represent? So there's a feature called name values inside of APIM where you can go ahead and use it as a configuration store. Now, there's both sort of sensitive and insensitive data that you can capture within this feature itself. So if you've got just URLs that could be in plain text, you can go ahead and store it in that manner. If you've got secrets, like we've got, especially when we're protecting some of those logic app endpoints with the SAS tokens, we can store them as secrets. And then also there's Key Vault integration as well. So if I want to then go ahead and expose the shipping capability, I can go ahead and do that. And so I've got this API inside of Postman here, where I can go ahead and for a specific order, in this case, order 10,000, we can see that it's been picked up and the delivery company now has it in their possession. If we look at the next order, 10,001, we can see that it's out for delivery. And if we go ahead and check on order number 10,002, we can see that it actually has been delivered. And so Wagner in his session is going to go through that in more detail. And also as part of that scenario, that kind of bleeds into sort of the next one that I did want to talk about was how we can go ahead and subscribe to delivery status updates. And so as part of the experience, you're going to see in Wagner's demo, he has the ability to go ahead and to say, I'd like to subscribe to WhatsApp notifications. So when my product hasn't been delivered yet, go ahead and enroll me into a WhatsApp notification. And so we can actually take advantage of this through Twilio. So you might be familiar with Twilio in terms of sending SMS messages. There's a connector out of the box that allows you to go ahead and to do so. There's another capability inside of Twilio. It's not exposed through the connector, but allows you to go ahead and set up a WhatsApp profile and a WhatsApp sandbox, and then you can go ahead and use WhatsApp as that communication vehicle. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this. And the way this has been structured is it's very decoupled once again, and it's going to be decoupled from a messaging perspective. So what would happen here is that when an order has been updated inside a Dataverse and a status has been sent to delivered, we want to subscribe to that using a logic app. Then to decouple this process, because we might have multiple processes that want to use WhatsApp, not just this specific scenario, we can actually use service bus messaging once again to provide that decoupling. And so we can go ahead and publish an event to basically service bus and then subscribe to that specific event and then go ahead and construct that message and then go ahead and route that. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to once again, this is the stateless execution. So we can go ahead and subscribe to this specific topic in a peak lock manner. We're going to go ahead, pull that message off the wire, go ahead and parse it so we've got a strongly typed message. Now, when it comes to the Twilio API, they want you to URI encode the phone numbers. So you've got sort of the plus sign and they've got this colon thing. So you need to encode that so that it actually can be submitted properly. So that's what we've got going on here is we're going to go ahead and encode the the to phone number, the from phone number, and then also the payload itself. And then what we can go ahead and do is use the Twilio API to go ahead and call this. And so what we've got here is there's an API that includes like your account. Our content type will be basically URL encoded form. And then we need to provide a body that includes these URI encoded values that we can go ahead and send. Now, naturally, we don't want to send notifications multiple times for the same delivery itself. So after we've gone ahead and submitted that request, we want to go ahead and update the Dataverse, the source, and indicate that this delivery notification has been sent. So in order to do that, similar to ServiceNow, we need to obtain some reference data so that we can go ahead and update that record. So what we'll do is we'll just do a filter query on that specific order number, which will give us a reference to that record. Then what we can go ahead and do is set the order status value to delivered, and the delivery notification is set to yes as well. And so that will prevent it from being called again in the future. Now, naturally, we want to complete this message. So if this is successful, we don't want to process it again. And then same thing, if it fails, we'll abandon the message from that perspective. So what we've got here is inside of Service Bus, we have a topic. And so here I've got a topic just called notifications.sms. And then I've got a subscription that is then specific for WhatsApp. So you can imagine if I had other channels that I might be interested in, I could go ahead and create additional subscriptions for those channels itself. Now, what I'm going to do for this scenario is I'm going to take advantage of the Service Bus Explorer, and I'm going to go ahead and send a message into that specific subscription. So we've got a very simple payload here, and we'll go ahead and we'll drop it in and choose our content type to application JSON, and we'll go ahead and click send. So that's a good sound. So if we head over to WhatsApp here, we can see that the order number 10,002 has been delivered. And so you can kind of think of building a fairly immersive experience from a chatbot where if you go from, I want to understand if the status of my order to, hey, now I want to actually subscribe so that I'm not having to go back to this chatbot over and over again. And so that's one way of actually being able to go ahead and accomplish that. Just going to flip back to the slides here. And so here's the Twilio integration piece. It actually is quite cool. So you can go ahead and try this for free. Just go ahead and sign up for a dev account on Twilio. And they've got a sandbox. So what you do need to do is you kind of enable it for a period of time. Then you can go ahead and play with this. If you then really want to do this, longer term, then there's a subscription you pay for. But you can at least explore this on your own at no cost. I do have a video on my YouTube channel where I go through step by step on how you can set it up. So you can go ahead and check that out if you want. But it was a neat integration, I thought. So just in terms of takeaways, I hope by seeing these demos, and certainly as you see Wagner building on top of this, that Azure Integration Services is agile. So we've talked about a lot of different styles of integration here. We've talked about VNet connectivity, which would represent how do you connect to on-premises resources where you've got VNet peering from your data center to a cloud. It could be other PaaS services where you've protected them in a VNet. We can go ahead and address those needs. We've talked about how do you protect external APIs. And it's one of those things where you don't use API management just for your APIs. You can actually go ahead and protect other APIs as well and give all of your developers in your organization, whether they're citizen or pro devs, that ability to reuse that API, but to be able to do it in a very structured manner itself. We've talked about messaging, which has been really important from a few perspectives, but in this case, really around like federating multiple organizations and being able to do pub-sub messaging. And then also we've seen SaaS integration using out-of-box connectors. So we saw Dataverse, which is a Microsoft service, a SaaS service. We saw ServiceNow using a connector, which is obviously a third party. And then we also saw HTTP. Now, even though our connector library grows, pretty much every week, we're not going to have everyone on the planet, but that HTTP becomes a fallback where you can easily go ahead and call into different APIs itself. Azure Integration Services is scalable. So all of these services can scale through performance-based metrics. We've got different SKUs based upon different performance characteristics. It's one of those things you saw the initial slide Balin had about all of our, it's basically the big dashboard in terms of the throughput. We're doing this at enterprise scale, and this is something that you can bet on. And then also Azure Integration Services is extensible. And we saw this in a few different manners, but one of them being pub-sub. So we had publish-subscribe messaging where we had these reusable components. We had the exception handling piece where we were able to go ahead and send tickets into ServiceNow. And those would be probably more business scenarios that I talked about, but certainly technical exceptions could use a similar pattern. We also saw it for the messaging with WhatsApp, right? Like we could add more communication channels itself and not reinvent that wheel every time we needed to go send out, whether it's SMS or Teams messages, or in this case, WhatsApp messages itself. So that's pretty neat. And then what we're going to see this afternoon is really how the Power Platform can also go ahead and build on top of all of these things. And that's just another surface area for you folks to explore. And we saw that scenario of Coca-Cola, and that's actually something I'm familiar with from my previous role on the Power Platform side of things. And so those scenarios are real in terms of like how do you go ahead and build out these common services and then be able to use them across the organization. And even though this is more of an integration specialist sort of pro dev audience, do take advantage of those opportunities. I think the chatbot, when you see that, hopefully you really enjoy it. That's a great example of how you can go ahead and extend your back end into your customer service and to be able to do that in a very quick and efficient manner itself. So I think I'm pretty much out of time, but just in terms of call to action, what I would suggest, if you're not using standard today, start exploring it. We talked about, generally you're not doing big bangs, and I totally agree with that theory, but this is the time to start to understand the capabilities. When you see our roadmap session this afternoon, it's predominantly related to standard. Like that's where we're really pouring our investments in. Go ahead and try out the built-in custom connector, the service provider interface implementation itself. We've had a lot of interest in that in terms of like, hey, I'm trying to do this kind of on-prem connector, but I want to do it built-in. How do I do it? Go ahead and look for that there. Obviously, from a Logic Apps team perspective, we've got some properties to check out. The YouTube channel where we're starting to do more Logic Apps live, so do look for that. We've got the Logic Apps Twitter handle as well. And then from my personal channel, I do try to post weekly just on integration and automation, so go ahead and check that out. And then lastly, enjoy the rest of the conference and don't be shy. There's a large contingent of folks from Microsoft here. We're happy to chat with you. We want to understand what your needs are. This is a great opportunity. So do tap us on the shoulder. We're happy to chat from that perspective. So that's it for my session, but thanks everyone. And we'll see you again this afternoon.
Covey.co